Hello! So, this is actually my second time recording a video about part 4 of Words of Radiance. I recorded the video yesterday, and I really wanted to try and make it into one video, as opposed to what I did with part 3. And I did succeed. It was a very long video. It was over 40 minutes long, but I did manage to get it all in one video. And then I went to bed and I thought about it, and I realized that there were so many things I just didn't talk about in that video. And I thought about making a second video, but the things I didn't talk about were so scattered across different topics that, frankly, I just figured it would be best to redo the whole thing from scratch, this time from the start, with the assumption that I will be making this into 2 videos. So, this is going to be almost certainly, unless I somehow manage to be much quicker this time around, even though I'm talking about more things, this is almost certainly going to be the first of 2 videos this week, just like last week. So there will be a video today and probably also on Sunday. So, let's talk about the main gist of the plot for now that is present within these within this part of the book. And there's really 3 things here. There's Shalon's story at the start, where she breaks into the Ardent's mental hospital and talks to Talonel. There is Caledon's time in prison and what he does immediately after being released. And then there is the climax of this section, which is the part where Caledon and Shalon are trapped in the chasm together and go on a fun little adventure. So I'm going to talk about Caledon's time in prison first. So, I really like the depth given to sort of the ways Caledon's mind works while he's trapped in prison. The way he catastrophizes, the way he sort of keeps coming up with the worst possible scenarios and panicking and freaking out about it, and just imagining all the worst possible things that could happen while he was in there. It's very realistic as a depiction of how depression works. I do wonder if Sanderson himself suffers from depression, because I feel like his portrayal of it is a lot more detailed and in-depth than, for example, his portrayal of Vin's anxiety, or some of the other sort of neurodivergencies that have shown up throughout the Cosmere so far. It could be that this is based on personal experience. It could also just be that he's just become a much better writer, which he absolutely has, as I will talk about later. Because, of course, Stormlight Archive is, like, written at a level that is miles above any other Cosmere book so far. So I don't necessarily think that's a personal experience thing, but it might be, because it is, like, an extremely realistic portrayal. I have lots of friends who suffer from depression, and it is very, like, eerily reminiscent of how the minds of people with severe depression can work sometimes. So that's really good. What I'm somewhat more dubious about is the whole assassinating Elhokar thing. So I have implied in the previous video that I think that assassinating Elhokar isn't necessarily a terrible idea. Like, maybe we should do this. He does suck. Maybe Moash and his new friends have a point. And I stand by that. I do think that, I don't necessarily think assassinating him is the right call, but certainly, I mean, personally, I would prefer, like, a popular Dark Eyes revolution, maybe, to overthrow the Light Eyes, and Elhokar with them, but that doesn't seem likely. So I guess as a second best option, getting rid of Elhokar and putting Dalinar on the throne would at least be preferable to that, to the current situation. So in like this purely dispassionate, objective observer sense, I think that Elhokar's death is something that needs to happen. Like it's unfortunate that he has to die. He himself isn't like a terrible person. He's just deeply incompetent. Like, it's not like a Joffrey situation, but he is hurting people and causing death and suffering on an unimaginable scale through his incompetence. But the problem with that is that I don't think it's a great idea for Caledon to get involved with that plot, because his involvement, and Moash's involvement too, like if Elhokar is assassinated and in a way which in any way implicates Caledon or Moash or anyone from Bridge 4, that's going to be really bad for them, and also a really, really bad look for Dalinar, because they serve Dalinar directly, and if Dalinar then declares himself king, everyone is gonna be like, hey, you had your guys kill the king. This is not, like, this isn't succession, this is a coup, right? Even though Dalinar does not want to do that. So it would put both Bridge 4 and Dalinar in a really, really unfortunate position. Which is why it's really unfortunate that Caledon seems to have decided to help the assassins, and why I really, really, really don't like the fact that he gave the shard plate and shard blade that he got from Adolin to Moash. That was a really bad idea, because Moash is gonna use that to kill Elhokar, almost certainly, and then everything's gonna go to hell. Personally, I get why Caledon doesn't want the shard set himself. I understand his reasoning there. Personally, I would have given it to Teft, who is also a highly trained soldier, but not one currently plotting to assassinate the king. Therefore, a much better candidate to receive a shard blade and a set of shard plate. Hoo boy. But, well, what's done is done. It's Moash's now. Oh god, I don't know how that's gonna play out. I also don't know when it's gonna play out. My gut instinct is that we're not going to see the resolution of the Elhokar plot in this book, because I feel like the last section of this book has to be entirely about the expedition out into the Shattered Plains and the disaster that that's going to turn into. So I feel like whatever is going to happen to Elhokar is probably going to wait for the next book. Maybe it'll happen in this one too, and I'll be surprised. I don't know. But whenever it happens, I'm sure it will suck. I'm sure it will be very, very bad for Caledon and Moash and everyone involved. Because Caledon can't have nice things. That's just the rules. Okay, enough about Caledon's time in prison, though. Shalon. Shalon, in this section, is getting a bit too comfortable working with the Ghostbloods, in my opinion. Like, she breaks into the Ardent's mental hospital and talks to Talonel and gets some very interesting info, which I'll talk about in a moment. But she then just gives all that info to the masked woman. What was her name? Eatil. She just gives Eatil all that info, or rather sends it to Mraiz, without really withholding anything from what I can tell. And she doesn't even consider withholding anything. It's like I feel like she's kind of forgotten the part where she's infiltrated the Ghostbloods to work against them, not to genuinely work for them. Right now it feels like she's just genuinely straight up working for them. Which I feel like is like a case of inertia for her. Like she's gone to like she's forgotten sort of why she started this, because it's all exciting and new, and she gets like a spike of adrenaline from doing it, and she likes doing it, and it's fun, it's exciting, and so she kind of just forgot why she's there, which is unfortunate. I'll talk about the Talonel conversation later, actually, when I talk more about like the overarching plot stuff. So that's really all I wanted to say about this Shalon section, that she's just getting a bit too comfortable with the Ghost Bloods, I feel. The other part from this Shalon section, actually, or from one of her flashbacks here, is the reveal that Yasna wrote feminist theory, which I found very funny, and also very in character for Yasna. So I guess some of the social sciences are a bit more advanced in Roshar than they have been historically on Earth during the times when technology and the natural sciences were on the same level as in Roshar. Which makes a certain level of sense, because some other sciences are also more advanced on Roshar than they would be on Earth. For example, they seem to have a fairly good grasp of some ideas of quantum mechanics, which makes sense because they have access to Spren. And the idea that, like, feminist ideas would also be more advanced also makes sense because of the different role that women play in this society. They are all of the scientists, authors, writers. They are the curators and creators of culture, basically. So it makes a lot of sense that that culture would be more inclined to think about issues of gender equality. So I take back what I said last week, actually. It actually makes perfect sense for Shalon to use words like sexist and misogynist, because she probably read them in one of Yasna's books. So yeah, I like that. I like that detail. Now, on to the big reveal of Shalon's backstory in this part of the book, which is we finally get the scene of her killing her father. And it's interesting because there's a similarity in structure here between the way Shalon's story in this book is handled and Kaladin's backstory in the previous book is handled, which is that the emotional and narrative climax of the backstory isn't chronologically the last flashback. So here, I'm assuming that Shalon killing her father is going to be the last chronological flashback, in the sense that there's no gaps to fill in after Lynn's death. Like, once her father is dead, we know what happens with Shalon. We know where she goes, we know why, we know everything. But while his death was a climax, it wasn't the climax of her backstory. That's obviously going to be the death of her mother, which happened much earlier. And I'm comparing this to Kaladin's backstory because with Kaladin's backstory, the chronological climax was obviously Amaram's betrayal, but the emotional/narrative climax was Tien's death, which again happened before Amaram's betrayal, but we got the flashback afterwards. So I still haven't gotten the flashback of Shalon's mother's death, and that's going to be maybe the biggest revelation of this entire book when it happens, because holy crap, there is a lot of weird stuff going on around Shalon's mother's death. I still think it's pretty likely that Shalon herself killed her for some reason. I still can't even begin to imagine why or how it happened. I don't understand what's going on with Shalon's mom's soul being in a box behind a painting which Shalon can see but no one else can. I don't understand why this led Shalon to forget about her powers, which she apparently had before her mother's death. I don't understand so much about this, and I don't feel like I've missed some clues or anything. I feel like that's very much intentional. And I feel like whenever the chapter comes where we finally get the death of Shalon's mother, it's going to be one of the biggest reveals ever. Whatever it reveals, it's going to blow my mind, I'm sure. So I'm very hyped up for that moment. Anyway, moving on to the actual, like, sort of action climax of this part of the book, which is Shalon and Caledon trapped in the chasms during a high storm. So, very quickly after they find themselves down there, it becomes apparent that Caledon has developed a bit of a crush on Shalon. And this comes kind of out of nowhere. It's a bit sudden and unexpected. But while I would normally complain about that, in this particular case, I don't. And in fact, I love it. And the reason I love it is because just 2 chapters before that moment, I wrote in my notes, let me find this. Okay, so I wrote in my notes, again, this is before the book in any way hinted that Caledon had a thing for Shalon. So my note says, okay, screw it. I ship Shalon / Adolin / Caledon. And I do. I've concluded that those 3 need to be in a polyamorous relationship, and it would be perfect. It won't happen because Brandon won't go for that, I think. I feel like Brandon is fairly committed to, like, monogamous heterosexual couples. But I think that all 3 of those potential pairings have so much potential. Adolin and Shalon are just really cute together. Like, they're just adorable. Shalon and Caledon have this fantastic thing going on where they're, like, incredibly snippy with each other and insult each other every possible opportunity. Like, it's a real love-hate thing, which is a great basis for a fictional relationship. Not a great basis for a real one, but for a fictional romantic relationship, that's, like, primo entertainment material. Mwah. And of course, Caledon and Adolin have an amazing friendship rivalry thing now, where they both really respect each other, but they're also, like, constantly trying to one-up each other, and that is, like, maybe the best dynamic to naturally evolve into a romance, in my opinion. So, while I know it won't happen, because I'm sure I would have heard about it by now if 2 of the male leads of the Stormlight Archive actually got together, I wish for it with all my heart. I wish for that 3-way relationship to happen, even though it won't. That said, though, because I'd had this revelation that I wanted this to happen right before Caledon and Shalon fell in the chasms, when Caledon started crushing on Shalon, instead of thinking, oh, that's a bit sudden and weird, what I thought was, oh my god, I'm getting my wish. So it made me happy, instead of annoyed. So thanks to my shipping proclivities, I suppose, what could have been a really awkward and forced romantic tension was instead salvaged into something I enjoyed. Anyway, on to what actually happens down there. Caledon and Shalon basically tell each other everything. Well, not quite everything. So, Shalon hasn't told Caledon that she's a Surge Binder, but he's figured it out. Like, he's guessed that she is one. She hasn't guessed about him. And he's also figured out that... He's also figured out the whole thing about the fact that he killed Hilaran, which she hasn't figured out and he hasn't told her. Really, the one thing I think Shalon the one thing about Shalon that Caledon doesn't know is, I think, well, he doesn't know, obviously, about her involvement with the Ghost Bloods and all that, because that would require explaining the whole, uh, um, surge binding thing. And he doesn't know about her mother. Uh, I think. I think she didn't tell him about her mother, because I think that's like a memory she's buried. So whatever. So I don't think he knows anything we don't know about her backstory right now. And as for Shalon, she has no idea he's a surge binder. I don't think she even suspects it. And she also obviously doesn't know that he killed Helaran. But other than that, she seems to know most of it. So they like, out of all of our main characters right now, these two are the ones who know the most about each other, which is tragic, because once Shalon finds out the one thing she doesn't know, which is that Caledon killed Helaran, that's going to completely wreck that relationship, I'm sure. And like, even if she finds it in her heart to forgive him and to not blame him for it, which I'm not sure she will, it's going to put a strain on that relationship and really make it difficult for them to work together going forward, which is unfortunate, because we really need people working together in this story, instead of all the characters having their own thing going on and not telling each other about it. Which is why it's so frustrating that Caledon lost his powers and his bond with Syl right before a series of events which led to him wanting to tell both Shalon and Dalinar. Like, it is incontrovertible that if he still had his surge binding, he would have told Shalon, I'm sure, and he also would have told Dalinar at the end there, when Dalinar came to see him in the surgeon's tent. It's really obvious that Caledon would have told him if he had his powers. So it's incredibly frustrating, and I have a love-hate relationship with the kind of writing where the story hinges on the frustration of characters not telling each other things. I think it has, like, I think the potential payoff of something like that is amazing. I think the potential payoff of building that up and then delivering on it and finally sort of releasing that tension is great. But I really don't enjoy the feeling of that frustration while it's happening. I always sort of like gnash my teeth together while characters are refusing to communicate important information with each other that I know, but they don't. So I very rarely have fun while reading that, but then afterwards, in hindsight, I appreciate it as necessary to deliver a powerful moment later on. So I'm not criticizing the book for that. I'm just saying that sort of makes me very frustrated while reading some of these sections where I'm like, just tell each other things, come on. Please, just communicate. Even though it's totally in character and completely believable that they wouldn't. And in fact, if they did, I wouldn't buy it. It would be out of character. So I'm not even, like I said, this isn't a criticism. It's just like my emotional reaction to this. It's a very frustrating moment for me. The lack of communication. So, that's it for the major events. Now, there's a lot going on politically here. A lot, actually. Namely, there's several things I want to talk about. First of all, there is the reveal that Roshon is the person who was to blame for the death of Moash's grandparents, and that the reason Roshon was sent to Caledon's hometown and ruined Caledon's life and essentially killed Tien indirectly was basically because Elhokar gave him a very light punishment for his crimes. So there's that, and then second, there's the conversation between Caledon and Shalon about essentially Shalon's privilege and her complicity in the oppression of the Dark Eyes. So, I feel like the Roshon situation is kind of perfect narratively for showing how it isn't even necessary for the Light Eyes for a given Light Eye, such as in this case Dalinar, to directly oppress the Dark Eyes. In fact, Dalinar doesn't even believe, he doesn't want to oppress the Dark Eyes. He's looking out for them. He cares about them. He's as nice as the Light Eyes can get. His son just willingly spent weeks in prison just to stand up for a Dark Eye. And he didn't get that from nowhere. He got that from Dalinar. Like, I'm not saying that Dalinar and Adolin are not good people individually, but they don't have to do anything directly against the Dark Eyes. They harm the Dark Eyes indirectly simply by upholding the institutions of light-eyed privilege. So Dalinar defends the decision to exile Roshon to Hearthstone instead of putting him in prison or executing him. And he defends it as mercy. He sees it as mercy, and it is. But it's mercy that would never have been given to a Dark Eye. And because it was given to a Light Eye, because a light-eyed person was granted this societal privilege, Caledon's brother is dead, and he ended up enslaved. Like, this entire family that had nothing to do with Roshon's original situation was destroyed permanently because Roshon received the lighter sentence because of his social caste. So I feel like that whole story is a perfect illustration of how every single Light Eyes, or at least high-ranking Light Eyes, is complicit in this oppressive system, even if they are actively trying not to be. Because you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's not about individually treating the Dark Eyes better. It's about no longer allowing for the existence of this systemic inequality and systemic injustice. And that's something that Caledon understands, but none of the Light Eyes do. When he talks to Dalinar about it, Dalinar basically is like, oh, well, the way to accomplish that is for you to be great and rise through the ranks, and then you can change the world. And, like, sure, that might happen, but in the meantime, how many more families will be destroyed? How many more children will die? How many grandparents will be consigned to dungeons to rot to death? Caledon understands the stakes of the injustice, and Dalinar doesn't. Dalinar just does not get the extent of the devastation and death and suffering that this system enacts every single day. Now, Shalon, when Caledon talks to Shalon, there I feel like Shalon's point of view is better, because it's basically the same conversation. Like Caledon is like, oh, you don't know what it's like, and then Shalon is like, yes, I do, and then she explains why her life has similarly high stakes. And it was also hard. But and if Dalinar tried to pull this with whatever his backstory ends up being, I'm sure he has a deeply tragic backstory as well. But if Dalinar tried to do the whole, oh, my life has also been difficult, which to his credit he didn't try to pull, but if he tried to pull that, I would be like, yeah, okay, sure, dude, shut up. But the difference is that Dalinar is the High Prince of War, and also, like, probably the most powerful man in the world right now, Whereas Shalon is the youngest teenage child of a impoverished lesser house. So, like, I don't think Shalon can really be described as being super complicit in this oppressive system the way that someone like Dalinar is. Because she can't really do much about it. Like, all she can do is treat individual Dark Eyes better, which she mostly does. I mean, Caledon does have a point about the boots. The boots, well, he doesn't actually have a point about the boots, and the reason he doesn't have a point about the boots, and I'm surprised that Shalon didn't make this point, is that she would have done that to a light-eyed person. Absolutely. Like, I know Shalon well enough at this point to know that Shalon would absolutely have pulled that shit on anyone. Like, if Dalinar himself had been there, she would have been tempted to pull that shit on him. She's just an asshole. In a very fun way. I'm not saying anything bad about Shalon. It's just her personality. She just likes being a dick to people sometimes. But yeah, I think in the conversation between Caledon and Shalon, Shalon does have more of a point, but in the conversation between Caledon and Dalinar, Caledon very much has the moral high ground, and Dalinar doesn't have a leg to stand on. And overall, though, I do agree with Shalon that Caledon is just, from an external perspective, a very unpleasant person to be around. I don't necessarily think that's his fault. I don't think that's something he needs to change. I think it's just something he needs to recognize. He needs to be aware of how he comes off to other people, because I feel like he often isn't. I feel like Caledon is sometimes surprised when people treat him in ways which are really just responses to how he acts, like on a moment-to-moment basis. And I feel like this kind of thing is kind of what led him into jail in the first place, like his whole challenge to Amaram. If he'd taken a moment to think about what that would look like from the perspective of someone like Dalinar or Elhokar, he might have, like, it's unfair that it would look like that, but he could have very easily predicted what would happen. Like, there was no way that he could have reasonably expected that to go well. But I feel like he's not really good at viewing his own actions and what he does through the eyes of other people. Which Dalinar is better at. That's something that Dalinar is very good at, and both Shalon and Kaladin need to work on that. Because, for example, Shalon is surprised somewhat that Kaladin is super suspicious of her, without realizing that she has been acting incredibly suspiciously. Like, to us as readers, we know what she's doing, so we don't suspect her, but it makes perfect sense that Kaladin thinks that she's there to, like, assassinate Adolin or something, because she sure is acting like it, or at least was. So yeah, that's something that I'm looking forward to seeing if Kaladin and Shalon kind of work a bit more on this skill together now that they're kind of friends. Because I feel like they could maybe help each other learn to view themselves through an external lens, because they both have these very strong opinions of each other. Yeah, I'm going to stop talking for now, and I will come back in another video, which I'll probably record later today, which will go up on Sunday, and in that video I will talk about a lot of the stuff that I haven't talked about yet, which is mostly like the Cosmere stuff, because there's probably more Cosmere stuff going on in this section than anywhere before. And I will also spend a while talking about that Taravangian chapter in the intermissions at the end of this section, because that chapter is absolutely incredible. There's so much going on there. I could talk about that chapter for hours. I'll try not to, though. So I'm gonna go take a break and then probably record that second video, and I will see you on Sunday. Bye.